Welcome to the video podcast of Product Manager Thought Collectives. Today we're joined by Tal Raviv, who recently has been a guest talking about the Super IC at Lenny's podcast. So I'm grateful for having you here today. And then I know that you have been an IC for about 12 years, and you work at really famous growth companies like Patreon, DuckDuckGo, Wix, and now you're the product lead, also the first product hire at Riverside, which a lot of us are using your product to do video podcasts. So the first question I have for you is, how would you introduce yourself?
This is something I had to really think about. Let me find this. All right. So yeah, like you said, I've been doing product management officially with a title of product manager for about 12 years. Before that, I was a founder of a profitable SaaS company for 4 years. I actually learned to code to build that product. And then before that, I was a chemical engineer. And I always had this like fantasy of this parallel universe where I'm still a chemical engineer and working in a factory because I loved that when I did that. But software captured me with the instant gratification. So here I am. And today I'm teaching a course called Build Your Personal PM Productivity System. We'll talk about that.
Awesome. Thank you. So similar to you, I have a background with industrial engineering. So sometimes I'm also thinking, what if in a parallel universe, I could be working in a factory about operations research, right? How do you produce more shampoo bottles in an hour, right? How do you really optimize the productivity there? So it's interesting that we both have found our path into product management. And then similar to you, I was software engineer before as well. So I would also love to learn more in detail about your path into product management. Like, how did you land your first PM role? How do you even find this role? Maybe, 12 years ago when it was not as popular as today.
Yeah, it's funny. I'll go even one step before that. When I was tied to the factory I worked at Gore-Tex as an undergraduate. And I think one of the most valuable product management lessons I got, now that I think about it, was on that factory floor. So actually it was my first day as an intern, and my mentor, she was an engineer there, and she gave me a tour, and she's like, you see, here's the factory floor, here's this, that, and that. You see this corner office, and you see all these like offices that are lining the wall. That's where all the managers and like senior engineers are. And there wasn't a product manager title at Gore-Tex in that sense. And she's like, so I just want you to know, if you have any questions, anything that's really important that you're trying to figure out, don't go to them. Go to the people working on the assembly line. They know so much more than them. They have been here for decades, and they know how everything sounds, and if something looked slightly different or sounded slightly different, and those are the people who actually have all the information. You should be spending your time with them. And to me, I translated that, throughout my career. In any software company, I spent a lot of time with support, a lot more with sales. Like I really enjoy and get a lot of insights from that. So that was like product management before I realized even what it was. And then I didn't continue in that path. I had an idea for a startup, and to make that happen, I eventually just needed to learn to code myself. And during that startup, it was a SaaS startup. It was a tool for salespeople to avoid data entry. It was a Chrome extension that we charged for back when people were like, why would anybody pay for a Chrome extension? And the first ever experience where somebody I've never met on the internet swiped their credit card and paid me for code that I wrote. Never forget that. And then over the next couple of years, I was not just writing the code, I was also answering support tickets, and I was also doing marketing, and I was also raising money, and I was also, at the end of the day, a lot of UX decisions, even though I'm totally unqualified for it. And when it came time to move on and get a real job, I didn't know what that translated into, but I started reading job descriptions. That was still here in Israel at the time, and I was on this website of a company called Wix that had just gone public. So they were on the news. And I was like, oh, they look like fun people. I went to the careers page. It was a product manager role. And it sounded like the skill set that I had, and I just applied. And I think I was lucky timing wise, where everybody was figuring out what is a PM role. Nobody really knew. That was easy to get in. They basically, Wix, I know at the time we're looking for entrepreneurs. They're like, we don't know who would be great in this role. Nobody has experience in this role. So let's just hire entrepreneurs. So that's how I started.
That's amazing. So basically you have a little bit curvy path, right? So you learned how to code and you did a lot of kind of the entrepreneurship. And then you also joined a pretty big company, Wix, that's public. And you just happen to have a lot of skill sets that mingle different aspects of different domains. And then that's landed you the first PM job. So the next question is similar to kind of about your path. You have been working, for a lot of companies like Wix, DuckDuckGo, Patreon, now Riverside. So a lot of times that there are two types of PM. One is a more generalist PM, and then the other one is more domain specific PMs. So for example, Patreon, Riverside, I would consider these to be more creator focused companies. So what would you consider as the core domain skills for these companies, or do you consider yourself more of a generalist PM?
Interesting question. I think within each of these companies, it's not so much at the company level, it's like the team level. So within any one of these companies, I've worn the hat of a growth PM, working on, funnels with millions of people going through them. So you can really do a lot of quantitative work and A/B testing. And then even within growth, move to a more SaaS funnel, even in the same company like Patreon or AppsFlyer or Wix. And there it's a lot fewer people. It's more qualitative research and onboarding changes. But then I've taken off that hat and put on a developer API PM hat, and I've done that a few times. And at Riverside, I've done those roles and PM'd very technical teams at the same time as like very experience and customer experience heavy teams, like changing the navigation, changing the flow, fundamental like mental models of how people use our system and stuff like that. So within each company, there's a lot of different types of PMs that they need. And I've worked with payments PMs, and they're like very different people with very different passions. Risk PMs, and consumer companies will have search and discovery PMs. You can go on forever. And each of these are very different ways of thinking, different ways of leading teams. And I've tried to be more of like have as many of these hats as possible. It's really rewarding, keeps it really interesting. Definitely don't wear all the hats, but I think one of the coolest things about working at a hypergrowth company, I remember saying this to my manager at Patreon, to Adam Fishman, there was a moment where I reflected and I told him, if we were going to hire for a new PM to do what I'm doing now, I would not have the qualifications. Like, you would not hire me, right? Like, I would not get in for the thing I was asked to do. And he's like, yep, exactly. And that's the beauty of working for a startup, right? And now in hindsight, I'm like, I can do that. It's on my under my belt and experience. So I think that's the most important thing, is like being able to learn really quickly, adapt really quickly, and be super versatile, at least at these hypergrowth companies, that they need a lot of very different kinds of PMs. But also you have the opportunity to just you're just there, so you can do it and try it out and learn by doing.
Yeah. So it sounds like you basically have an open and growth mindset, right? You can fit yourself into whatever holes the company needs to be filled, and just being flexible and able to adapt. So I consider maybe this is a full stack PM. A few years ago when I was interviewing, I always introduced myself a full stack PM because I've done like the API platform work, and I've done a lot of front end like payments processing work. So I think maybe that's what you meant, right? You're able to switch into whatever function, what kind of form that the companies are in need of. But are there any transferable core skills when you made the switch, right? Are there any skills related to creator economy that what you acquired in Patreon that also really help you to be successful at Riverside? Are there those domain level of skills?
I think there are, for sure. I think the most important one is discovery. That's the one thing a PM can do nobody else is going to have as much bandwidth or expertise in doing. So like, how do you go out there and bring in the clues from the field? And that could be the classic, the best one, just talk to customers. But it could be a lot of things people don't think about, like full story, or bringing in mixed panel amplitude, or bringing in like better dashboards for support and actually sitting and just reading support tickets. There's spending a lot of time in the community, putting out surveys, that are continuous in the product or one-time survey. There's a million of these tools, and I think being really good at that applies everywhere. And the second area that it's really just on the PM, nobody else. No matter how great and empowered your team is, it's going to fall on the PM. Is validating risk, like identifying the risk of your solution. Now that you know the problem, then you have a solution. Then what are the risks? So, Marty Kagan talks about usability, viability, and feasibility. Those are the three you should always start with. But there's so many more, right? There's like brand risk, partner risk, and there's payments risk, and there's fraud risk, and like all these other things that could go wrong. And so that's the thing that should be going through your head. What can I validate? What could go wrong? And then how can I get ahead of that really cheaply and quickly? So I think those are like the really, really core skills that, like, if everything else went perfect and every other role did, was totally empowered and owned everything, end to end, and like you could just be a pure PM, I think that would be those two skills would still be left.
Yeah, that makes sense. So basically, discovery of the true customer pain points and assessing the risks, right? And you have different solutions. You could go about different directions. What is the best way for the team to invest their time and effort that will be having the most ROI? That makes sense. So I think PM is an interesting function because, as you said, it's a ever evolving profession, right? It's similar to software engineers. There's new programming language, there's new LLM models. And then for PM, there are always things you have to learn, right? For example, I listen to Lenny's podcast, or I would read a lot of newsletters that people are saying, hey, here's something you should read. And it is overwhelming. So sometimes you have to really come through those noise and chaos to say, hey, what is really useful for my job or for my future job that I want to have? So what are some latest trends of books and articles you find interesting that you want to share with us?
So there's a book that I read 11 years ago. I just stumbled across it in a bookstore here in Israel. And I'm very happy to hear that a lot more people are reading it in the last decade, and it really became a trend. So it's a book called Antifragile, and it's by Nassim Taleb. And for me, the book transformed how I thought. I went from being this like chemical engineer, software engineer, like want to make sense of the world and like create rules and systems and like engineer my way out of everything. And I think the beauty of the book is it just demonstrates how in every single field of human endeavor, economics, politics, medicine, you name everything else, that is an illusion. And we should be viewing ourselves as like very small humans with very small capacity to understand the world. And our goal should be not to try to understand the world, but to manage our risk through it and structure ourselves in a way that as chaotic things happen over time and surprises happen over time, and we're totally unable to predict things, that we're just constantly in this situation where our downside is smaller than our upside. And that's how it really affected a lot of my decision making as a PM as well. So I'll do a lot of things and people are like, well, that could go wrong. I'm like, yeah, but the worst case scenario isn't that bad. It's reversible. And if it goes well, it's going to be amazing. And if it doesn't go well, we can fix it later. Like, you really gave me a framework for that. Not to argue what I think is going to happen, but to put forth what the scenarios are and like why it's a good bet. And so the opposite of that mindset is this great phrase that he has in the book called the Harvard Soviet delusion, right? If you think like these are institutions that really try to pride themselves on planning, policy, knowing as much as possible, predicting 5 years ahead, right? All these things. So instead, like the best quote from the book is, I want to live happily in a world I don't understand. And I think as a PM, that's your life. That's applicable to your personal life, but it's applicable, right? You're navigating a team through massive amounts of uncertainty and risk, and you're just thinking like, I'm not going to get ahead of it. I'm not going to understand it. I'm not going to predict it. I just need to put myself and the team in a position where we're protected and we can still gain a lot.
Yeah, thanks for the recommendation. That book's on my list. It was a little intimidating to read it because I think it's a pretty thick book.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Yeah, so
I recommend jumping around.
Okay, jumping around. Okay.
Yeah.
I consider myself a fast reader, but I should probably conquer that book. It's like similar that, Game of Thrones, I always want to read the book, but then because it's so thick that I feel like, okay, I could read 3 more books at the time and finish one book like that. But thanks for recommendation. I think I can really connect with that philosophy that you want to live happily in a world you don't understand. And there are times that you have to take risks, right? But eventually, if you feel like, hey, you see some hope in doing that, then just go for it. That makes sense. So the next question, kind of going back to the PM focus, if you had to describe a typical day for you, what does that look like? The reason I'm asking this question is, I plan to interview a lot of PM from different domains, right? Like focus on creator tools. There are PMs working in fintech. There are PMs working in cloud management, right? So we are all product managers, but we have different focuses, different niche, right? I would imagine we have some similarities and some major differences of typical day. So I want to learn that, hey, we're in different geographical locations. We're in different types of companies. So how would you describe a normal day, right? Let's say nothing goes wrong, no drama involved. What does that look like for you?
So for me, I'll talk about. So I wake up in the morning. This is I'm going to sound like a cliche. I wake up at 5 a.m. Usually, before my alarm clock. It's because I go to bed really early. So I've gone from in my 20s saying nothing good happens after midnight to my 30s saying nothing good happens after 10 p.m. So I go to bed really early. So I wake up at 5 a.m. naturally. I go surfing. So Tel Aviv is one of the, if not the only city in the world where you can go surfing in the morning and then go to a world-class tech company for the rest of the day. And then surfing is, about 2 hours if there's good waves. If not, I just go swimming. And then I'll get to the office around 9:30 a.m. I try to, before I do anything, just do like those self-care tasks that always get pushed back. So I do like one of them, like, send the bank guy this form or whatever, those things that like never happen. Because I'm never going to prioritize it if I dig into work right away. And then the rest of my day, I divide it into 2 halves. The first half is deep work, and I protect that fiercely. And there's no meetings, but there's also no Slack. And I don't mind if people in the office come over to me and talk to me, just like these things that like trigger my brain into, chaotic mode, and I won't be able to focus otherwise. And I use that time to go over dashboards. I use that time to read support tickets. I use that time to write a document, to research competitors, like all these things that just require a really fresh brain. And the second half of my day I call it ping pong. So that's like, all right, my brain's not going to be doing any more creative work, reflective work. Let's just do the meetings now. So like around noon, the meetings start. I open Slack. I just take a deep breath and I see all the notifications, and I just like, start the battle till about 6 p.m.
Okay. Yeah, that's amazing. I used to work for a company that when I wake up, there are 1,000 messages I have to read through, and that was not a fun experience. And certain channels you cannot mute, right? So when in the morning when my alarm wakes up, I just have that kind of pounding heartbeat and the anxiety. It's like, oh, I have to do this. This is so. During my commute to work, I'm thinking about how catching up with all these like 1,000 messages or all different channels. So that wasn't fun. But it's interesting that you are really protective of your time in the morning because you start your day with some strong core activities, right? Have a fresh start of the brain, and then you do a lot of things that will require focus and no disruption at all. And then in the afternoon, that's when you take meetings, catch up and stuff. So that's a very interesting way of working, and I respect that. I think I need to learn more about how not to, again, looking at Slack first thing in the morning or when I open the laptop. I think about, hey, here are the top 5 things I should be doing, and then let me get those done before I do anything else.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of tactics you need to implement. I needed personally to implement to make that happen. So it's one thing to block the first half of your day and call it deep work.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a whole different thing for that to actually happen because there's so many things that are trying to ruin that. And some of it is actual, demands on our time. I think that's actually very rare that, like the world can't operate without us for 3 hours. And a lot of it is internal. So like FOMO and desire for distraction, and is telling ourselves a really good story that we're probably super needed in Slack, and Slack will fulfill that story because there'll be things waiting for you. So there's a lot of little tactics that you can implement to make that actually work. And I've made that work for about 8 years. It's not perfect, not all the time, but for about 8 years, I've been able to split my day that way.
Yeah. In your interview with Lenny, you mentioned there's only twice in a year that people had to reach you for something super urgent. And people who need to reach you have your phone number so they can just call you or whatever. So that, I think that is a great reflection of people respect your time and your way of working, right? You don't have to attend stand-ups, 10 in the morning or something, or a status update, because people know, hey, Tal works best in the morning with no meetings involved. So I think that's a great way of showing that Riverside has a culture that's really flexible and accommodating to people's different styles.
Yeah, or also ideally, first of all, I have to say I can do this because I have very strong teammates.
Mm-hmm.
But I think also it's people, like sometimes I have a team lead who saw me doing this and he started to do it too. So it's synchronized, right? So we just do all of our meetings in the afternoons.
Yeah.
Or there's like meetings that I don't need to be a part of even if I was online. So those get scheduled in the mornings, so that we can do our other meetings in the afternoon. So people respect it, and I found that people really they understand why. You don't need to explain too much why you're doing it because they have the same demands as well.
That's amazing. So speaking of kind of managing your time and productivity, you're doing a 2-week cohort-based class on Maven about PM productivity. Can you give us more insights of how that class came together and who would be a good audience for this class? And then there are so many different PM classes. Why do you want to do one that focus kind of getting shit done?
Yeah. So let me actually pull this up so it's easier for me to refer to. So the course kind of evolved when Maven approached me, and we started to think together what we could do a course about. And there's all these sorts of topics, but in the meantime, I started to become really self-aware of all these little habits that I was evolving over the years, and then I started talking to my colleagues about their habits and noticing similarities between teams, and I just started like jotting them down and really enjoyed jotting all these things down, just observing myself, observing my colleagues. And I just noticed that the common theme was, how do I do as much as I possibly can, own as much scope as leadership can give me, and stay at all the levels of strategy all the way down to, hands-on. And how do I make that happen? And I kind of challenged myself, like, how much more can I say yes to? Let's just see, like, where does this break? So that made me very conscious of what are my systems? When I notice myself getting overwhelmed, what am I doing to, to make stuff happen anyways? And how am I handling that emotion? And so that evolved into a course with the help of a lot of user research, talking to a lot of other product managers, looking for the commonalities. And the timing ended up being really good because, over the last couple of years, with the great flattening, as people are calling it, as a big premium being put on individual contributors, as companies have much more talent, experienced talent to choose from for fewer relatively product manager roles, and fewer management roles means that a lot of people with management experience are actually now applying for individual contributor roles. So all of this comes together to raise the expectation for individual contributor product managers. How many teams you run, how much you're able to do, how much of the product you can be responsible for. And then you add into that AI, right? And we just have to be on top of all that, right? Like that's going to be just raise the expectation further. If you're not going to leverage AI as much as possible, somebody else will. And so the idea of this course is basically, how do you take a moment and do what every successful product manager that's gone to senior and principal and so on has done, which is PM your own productivity operating system.
Yeah.
And PM how you're leading your team, and also put on a PM hat and look at your product org and how it's structured, how teams are structured, and is that helping you or hurting you? So that's what the course roughly covers.
So you mentioned that it talks about like how to optimize your time, right? Who would be a good audience for this class? What about like entry PMs for people who want to transition to product management, or is more for people who are already in this field that they want to up level their skills?
The ideal student that's going to get the most value out of this course is somebody who's been in the role for a few years, somebody in the middle of their career as a product manager, because it's like one of those courses, and I'm sure we've all had this feeling where you could read the material, but then when you encounter the problem, it doesn't connect. So it's better that you encounter the problem, and then you're in the cohort with the live workshops and the small groups and the accountability and the the offline material. So then it all clicks. It's much more practical because this is like a live course with a cohort and a specific date. That's the whole idea behind it. Is like, how do you process a lot of this experience you've already had? All these times you hit a wall, or you had to deal with difficult emotions of overwhelm, distraction, all these things we've all had to go through. And if you've had those experiences, if you hit those walls, if you've seen burnout on the horizon, we all have, like, that's gonna position you to get the most value out of this course.
That's very interesting, because I feel like it's kind of like teaching you, wait, what's the word? Teaching you fish, or giving you the fish is not as good as teaching you how to fish, right? So if you want to be a 10x IC, you could take years to figure out, okay, how do I get there? Try out different note-taking system or different tools. Or you can have almost like a shortcut of people who have walked the walk, right? They have experienced the pain before and then learn, okay, what is the best way for me to get the most out of my time? It reminds me, I think in college I spent $10, took a speed reading class. I think at that time, because English is not my first language, so I was like, okay, what if I can't read very well? So let me learn how to read really fast. And it actually brings up tremendous benefits for me that I'm able to read and grasp the concepts faster. It's a working process, but I love that you picked the category that probably would have one of the biggest impact for the PM career. It's not just about interview skills. It's not just about how do you write a good PRD, but it's more about how to find the system that works well with your style and then help you to, again, reach a big impact in the organization or in your career. So that's an amazing category. Definitely, I'll keep checking your class, and then maybe I'll recommend some friends take that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
And then one last bonus question. So since I work at Stitch Fits, it's an e-commerce company where stylists pick up the clothes for you. A lot of my clothes right now, wardrobe, is coming from my, bi-monthly box from Stitch Fits. So I'm curious, what is your favorite clothing brand? And I understand like men and women have different styles, different needs, but I want to kind of learn from you, what are some of your fashion choices?
Yeah, my dream is to look good, feel good without thinking too much. So like, I appreciate that it's important. I know it's important. I know it's important to me, it makes me feel good to dress well, but also I want it to be like really easy and not like have to decide too much. So for me, I try to like find something that works and then just buy a ton of it. And right now for me, that's built shirts. And that's like something where a friend recommended it. I tried one shirt. I saw that people who are very candid to my face if I've dressed well or dressed poorly, and I trust them, gave me compliments. I'm like, great, I'm ordering a bunch more. And then for me, it just makes it easy. It goes easily with, for me, my Tel Raviv jeans in the winter and shorts in the summer, and keeps it really simple. And I just feel good. It's a great fabric. It's a great fit. Then I just move on with my life. So as a guy, for me, that's the dream.
That's amazing. So how did you discover this brand? And then do they ship worldwide, or it's just for the Middle East? Yeah.
I think they only ship in the US. So I ordered it when I visited the US. A friend recommended it. I think I asked him. Basically, before that, I was like buying Uniqlo tees, which is also great.
Uniqlo is pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah, like really, really simple, basic Uniqlo tees. And I think I told a friend about this, and he's like, "You should try this. It's like the same idea but better," just like that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I agree. I share very similar philosophy. I mean, you could spend hours looking through different e-commerce sites where I could have stylists pick whatever fits, the body types and needs and stuff. So my favorite brand is 41 Haythorn. It's actually our in-house brand, only available on Stitch Fits. So a lot of my dresses, a lot of my shirts are from there. So I agree. I don't like big logos, right? I want to live a simple life, right? Whatever occasions that will fit well. And I don't have to think too much about, okay, how do I match this color versus this? So thank you for recommending the belt. I have to have my husband check it out. I think he's very similar to you in a sense that once something works well, he doesn't want to think about it, right? You could put your time and energy in something else, right? Think about your life and don't think too hard about, oh, what do I wear? Like, how much should I keep up with the fashion choices?
Exactly, yeah.
Thank you so much for your time, Tal.